We're currently looking down at the 500 millibar winds above our heads on Wednesday afternoon. I think one thing you can make out just on this map here is this upper level ridge that is spinning near the Four Corners region over the southwest. We have something of a zonal or fast moving jet to the north of that near Washington, moving through parts of Idaho and Montana. And then this upper level low is spinning here, not the strongest, but you can clearly see that counterclockwise flow here, and that has pushed some of the low clouds up the coast here along California, a little bit closer to Monterey and the Bay Area here. The big story, I think, with that upper level ridge spinning right over the southwest is this has returned heat at the beginning part of this week. If you remember, at the end of last week, we were dealing with triple digit temperatures in parts of California, excessive heat warnings, and that extended all the way through, the lower Colorado River Valley, parts of southern Arizona, even further up north, near Las Vegas, and that heat kind of pushed up later in the week and a little bit toward the weekend into some of the northern states. We had something of a cool down here over this past weekend, but the heat has returned, and the heat advisories and the warnings as well. If I jump over and look at the satellite imagery of Southern California here, you can actually see that upper level low has started to push this low level stratus further north up the coast. Those are now spilling near Monterey. You can trying to get up near the San Francisco Bay, actually in the afternoon here, waning along the Southern California coastline. But just kind of a continuation of the June gloom. It has been weakening predictably in the afternoon, but I think as we go through the forecast here into next week, I think it's going to continue. There might be some breaks in it, but unfortunately, just kind of the way the pattern's shaping up, I think we'll have to deal with it for a little bit longer while we're still in the month of June, and it's appropriately named. If we look at a wider shot of the visible satellite imagery here across the west, if you look closely at the low clouds here, you can kind of see that, the clockwise spin in that upper level ridge. When you see this, and it's a very summertime pattern, it's indicative that there's heat building in underneath that ridge, and that is certainly the case here across parts of Southern California, parts of Arizona, even parts of the Central Valley here. A little bit cooler along the coast, right under the influence of the maritime conditions and the marine layer. But this ridge has built in, and this is a little bit what we're concerned about going through summer, that we're going to see ridges over the southwest. If they position themselves kind of right over this area, it's going to be hard to get that monsoon moisture to push into here. We want those ridges, to get a better monsoon season, if that's what we're looking for. The ridges to move a little bit further north to allow some of that moisture to sneak up underneath it. If we jump over and let's look at the forecast high temperatures here today, you can see 100 degrees forecast for the Central Valley, a little bit warmer even in parts of the Sacramento Valley. As you go southeast through California, parts of southern and central Arizona, parts of southern Nevada, you're talking triple-digit temperatures up near 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And there are excessive heat warnings active here for some of these areas, excessive heat watches for parts of desert California. And just keep an eye on the heat. I think it continues into Thursday, but as I take you through the forecast in just a little bit, I think we're likely to see a little bit of moderation of that going forward. Jump over and look at the all hazards map. This is from the National Weather Service, valid just after lunch here. If you look in southern Arizona, you can see this kind of pink color there. Those are the excessive heat watches across southern and central Arizona. Heat advisory in the San Joaquin Valley here, the southern reaches of it. We actually have an excessive heat warning up here near the kind of the northern reaches of the Sacramento Valley. That's where those temperatures were edging even above, that 104, 100.5 Fahrenheit number, getting into a little bit more of heat stress than we would in the heat advisory. If we jump over and let's look at where that upper level ridge is situated now. Remember, we kind of drew that right here. We saw that cloud field moving in that clockwise fashion. There's that upper level low just off the coast of California, and that very kind of west to east or zonal jet moving really through the Northeast Pacific, through Washington, through Montana's, across the Dakotas. That's kept up an active storm track in this area. Hasn't brought a tremendous amount of rainfall in areas like the Northwest, but it has brought some here over the last week or so. If we jump over and look at those temperatures, these are not absolute temperature values, but they are the temperature anomalies, and we can step through kind of the next few days to see where we're going with respect to these temperatures. Before I do that, I do want to take this upper level ridge and this kind of trough forecast out into the future a little bit. And as I do that, the first thing we'll see is this upper level trough is going to come on shore in Southern California here as we go through Thursday. Now, there are times when these can be a little bit more potent. They can bring some rainfall, showers, storms to the area. This one weakening pretty quickly. It's going to Can't rule out, some drizzle, some patchy, very light rain amongst parts of Southern California, some high clouds, but doesn't look to be a big weather maker this early in the season. Just not a lot of moisture associated with it. All the while, as we go through the day Friday and then into Saturday, we can see this upper level trough, which was situated over here in the Northeast Pacific, is going to be moving toward the east, starting to get over parts of the Pacific Northwest first as we get near the kind of early half of the weekend. As I take this through Sunday and then into Monday, you'll see this really kind of settling in here across the west region, right over Oklahoma, Northern California, Northwest Nevada, parts of western Idaho, really bringing the temperatures down, bringing some rain chances to the interior here, likely some more rain in this area here, kind of on the upswing of this trough as we generally expect the strongest rain here. So keep an eye on that, potentially even some snow in the middle of June near the solstice at some of the highest elevations here amongst the mountains in parts of Idaho and far western Montana. You can see it, this trough moving all the way through south through the region, expecting temperatures to come down. Unfortunately, with that kind of flow coming around like this, with a low pressure system in here and the flow following that around, we're actually getting some onshore flow here in southern and central California. It's likely to help push that marine layer further inland. So unfortunately, if we get a little break here this weekend, expecting the June gloom to return in earnest next week and continue its march through the month. Now we'll shift over and look at the surface temperature conversation as opposed to the trough on the page before. So take this forecast through Saturday and then into Sunday. You can see those temperatures coming down on Saturday for parts of the Pacific Northwest and even parts of the kind of the upper Northwest here across the U.S. Still warm across some parts of the southern region here as we go through the weekend, and maybe even kicking out some of that June gloom as we go through the day on Saturday, maybe early Sunday as well. As that trough really positions in over the region, you're talking a big drop in temperatures, as much as 20 degrees below average in parts of Nevada, parts of central Idaho, southeastern Oregon. And I'm drawing that in about the exact color of the color bar there. So let's try that again. There we go, much more visible. Cooler temperatures through the Central Valley of California and even Southern California. But again, that onshore flow likely to keep that marine layer in the stratus around parts of California as we go through next week. Take the forecast all the way out to Wednesday and then Thursday of next week. You can see that trough starting to exit the area, getting east of the Continental Divide, and that's allowing some warmth to return back to some of these coastal areas here. We'll have to see on the other side of it whether the June gloom returns. You can see kind of some conflicting signals here, maybe for the central coast, but maybe a break for the southern California coastline as we go through the work week next week. Something we'll have to tackle as we get there. It can be hard to forecast that marine layer a little bit further out just because it's kind of a small and thin feature in the atmosphere. And then perhaps we'll kind of talk about the long-range conversation in a second, but there are some hints from the long-range models that we could be returning some heat to the west region. It's getting farther out into the forecast. You're talking Saturday of next week here. So don't want to be too confident in what we're showing here, but it is there in some of these forecast models. Look at the absolute temperature maximums rather than just kind of that anomaly color. You can see this is the map we just looked at a few slides ago. I'll take this into Thursday. See temperatures coming down here across the Central Valley. So the heat warnings, the advisories likely allowed to expire as we go through the day tomorrow, but continuing into parts of the lower Colorado River Valley, the desert Southwest. As we go through the day on Friday and then into Saturday, remember that heat sticking around kind of in this area here, but cooling off up here. High temperatures now down into the 60s as we go through the day Saturday for the Willamette Valley. High 60s, 70s, and then 70s here in parts of Idaho. And then, as I mentioned, high 60s here in eastern Washington, high 60s into the 70s for parts of northwest Montana. As we go through Sunday and then Monday, temperatures even just a little bit cooler than that through the weekend here. Now getting colder temperatures. Cooler than where we were. I don't want to say colder temperatures as I circle, triple digit temperatures here, but cooler than where we were temperatures, right, in parts of California, where, in the middle of June, the solstice, you get temperatures in the Central Valley topping out at the 80s. That's quite a bit below average. And, only a measly 105 degrees Fahrenheit for parts of southern and southwest Arizona and southeast California here. Taking the temperature, this is the end of the forecast run here from the National Weather Service, the NDFD product. But again, a little bit cooler here next week, certainly for a number of areas on June 18th. That would be Tuesday of next week. Walk you through the precipitation conversation. As you'd imagine, in summer, not as much going on here, just not as much moisture getting up into the west region at this time. So we go through the day Thursday and then into Friday. Remember, that was the time when that upper level trough was coming on shore here in parts of California. If you didn't see much, I didn't either. Maybe some in the plateau here in Arizona, just some showers and storms before it gets east of the divide. Not too much to talk about. Where we will see precip is in the Pacific Northwest, maybe more so the Seattle-Tacoma area, maybe the far northern reaches, the Willamette Valley, just some drizzle. Maybe even getting into eastern and northeastern Washington near Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, Panhandle region of Idaho on Saturday as that trough settles in. And then there'll be kind of another piece to that coming through, kind of the epicenter of that trough, or the apex, as that comes through on late Sunday, early Monday, bringing some renewed rain chances to Willamette Valley. Nothing too spectacular here. Where I think we might see more substantial rain is, again, kind of on that upswing of that trough here in parts of northwest Montana, with some more appreciable rainfall values, certainly for June here on Monday afternoon in parts of northwest Montana. And I'll take this forecast forward, even some, hard to believe, but snowfall possible here in parts of the Salmon River Mountains, western Montana, the northern U.S. Rockies. Doesn't look like a ton of precip wants to get into the Snake River Valley here, but certainly can't rule it out with that trough overhead. Showers and storms can bubble up underneath it, and then in eastern Washington, northern and northeast Oregon as well. Again, as we go through Monday evening, and then I'll take this out into Tuesday afternoon, you can see that trough lingering over the area. Renewed rainfall chances really kind of Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for parts of the Northwest. Take the forecast beyond that into Wednesday and then Thursday. You can see that exiting the region off to the east, and that's when we might see that warm up again late next week from some of the temperature forecasts. If we look at the 7-day forecast precipitation anomalies from the ECMWF, it's from the same model where we just walked through that precipitation step. You can see increased precip relative to average here for the Pacific Northwest, but not too much here. Where we're really seeing kind of a bullseye is in northern Idaho, eastern Washington, northwest Montana with some excess precipitation, and they typically get this time of year. Some of this potentially falling as snow. And it is worth mentioning, this area I'm kind of circling here is where we do have some lingering drought here from the USDA drought monitor as we've gone through early June here. So, not a bad thing, I think, to get some precipitation and rainfall in here. We've talked at times about enhanced wildfire risk in this area here just due to the drought deficits earlier in the year, the expectation that the heat this summer is probably going to focus on a region that looks something like this. So not a bad idea to just get some June precipitation and get some snowfall back into the mountains, at least briefly. Speaking of that long-term kind of wildfire, drought, heat risk combination there, I think this is a little bit bigger. This is the latest MME forecast of precipitation anomalies for a 3-month kind of seasonal window from July, August, and September. So we'll call it kind of the late summer, maybe even a monsoon forecast. And this has been one of the more aggressive NMME runs you'll see, I think, for the Western region. It combines a number of these different long-range seasonal outlooks together in one, and there's strong agreement, at this point that parts of the Southwest, the Front Range, as we've talked about, is looking at a drier summer, a weaker monsoon than we'd typically expect, and then kind of co-located with some of this would be excess heat. So the concern here for kind of a busier wildfire season, more drought and heat risk in the interior is increasing. We're seeing more models kind of converging and agreeing on that. And really, if you look at this, it's looking La Niña E, and that you see increased precip here in the Gulf of Mexico and parts of the Central Atlantic, and then less here in parts of the Northeast Pacific, which we see that signature sometimes in La Niña years. We've talked in the past how El Nino, we can actually get more hurricanes coming up in this region. And last year it felt like there was one to talk about every week, if not 2 a week. And with La Niña, we'd expect less of that here, and that tends to kick them over into the Atlantic. So expecting a bigger hurricane season here during that kind of late summer, early fall period, and comparatively less moisture, less precipitation to talk about here in the Eastern Pacific. I do want to show you, this is a different forecast model. It is a European forecast model, but it's from the AIFS. That's artificial intelligence, a new forecast system they have, which runs on a totally different back end. But I found it to be pretty accurate and reliable, particularly in kind of that 7 to 10 day window. Or at the very least, it gives us kind of a different opinion as to where we might be going in the long range. I thought it worth looking at today. I'm going to take this kind of upper level height pattern out into the future, and this looks really similar to what we just talked about. You can see that ridge dropping into the west region. On Tuesday and Wednesday, we just talked about the precip conversation in parts of the northwest and northern Rockies. We talked about the cool down across parts of the west region. And as that exits and weakens on Wednesday into Thursday, near the end of next work week, the ECMWF AIFS through next weekend keeps the west, I wouldn't say cool, but relatively, seasonal, maybe a little bit on the warmer side, but no major big ridge that I think would spell a big heat wave until I take it out a little bit further beyond that near the end of June. So this is all the way out to Tuesday, June 25th. At this point, it's a 10 plus day forecast, so can't put too much weight into it. But you can see it building in the heat here across the interior west, particularly around Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada. This would push temperatures up in this region here, and that's fairly consistent with some of the long-range forecasts that we just talked about. That's kind of this area here where we expect that heat to build in. If it builds in a little bit further north, that could help the monsoon season maybe get an earlier start. But if it builds in this region here, it's going to be a little bit harder to pull some of that moisture up. But nonetheless, heat and dry risks, I think, are advertised here. It's a long-range forecast, not something we're going to put too much weight in at this point, but it is consistent with some of the kind of seasonal and monthly forecasts that we've been keeping an eye on for that region. And there's support here even from the long-range ECMWF model, which runs itself on a little bit different of a back end of increased heat here and dryness, even through July. Don't want to have that one pulled up here. Don't want to have too many slides on this video. But some kind of stars aligning here for maybe the end of June, early half of July for that heat and that summer pattern to finally settle in across the western region. If we look at the Climate Prediction Center, this is the risk of hazardous temperatures really kind of near that last week of June. And if you look closely, as we kind of cool things off here in the west early next week and this weekend, that heat shifts east across the eastern U.S., over the parts of the Corn Belt, the Mid-Atlantic, New England. You can see them, they've circled this area for kind of 620 to 626. But after that, there is some hints in those forecast runs that we just looked at, like the AIFS, for example, that the 22nd through the 26th, a little bit later into the month, this could be shifting back toward the west over areas like Idaho, Utah, northern Arizona, Nevada, parts of Wyoming, areas that we talked about. And then they even have a little cutout here for the parts of the San Joaquin Valley. I think that it's funny that it's almost like an addendum. But it warrants it. Sometimes when we build heat in the interior, you don't get much heat in coastal California or Oregon, but the San Joaquin Valley almost sometimes follows more closely what the interior basin temperature pattern looks like than the rest of California. Last thing I wanted to show you here, this is a Havmuller diagram. A lot going on in this image, but where I'll point your attention to is this these colder, bluer colors here, I should say, just bluer on the map here. This is actually an ECMWF European model forecast of trade winds going through the end of June over the Central Pacific. And we care about the Central Pacific because that's where La Niña has been slowly trying to develop as we've gone through spring and now early summer at this point. And this blue color here indicates an increased strengthening of those trade winds. I'll change that color around there. And as these strengthen in this direction, that's what those blue colors are telling us, we tend to get a strengthening of La Niña. And these are right over the Central Pacific. So that's a recipe to increase our way toward La Niña, if you will. I'm going to just kind of jump over and show you this is a forecast out a few days into the future. We've looked at maps like this before, looking at those trade winds over the Central Pacific. And you can kind of see that surge here in these winds south of Hawaii. That helps to pull the cold water here in the kind of eastern tropical Pacific toward the Central Pacific. And this is where we're really focused on in terms of that La Niña development as we go through summer here. What does that look like? Well, we measured those ocean temperatures in the central tropical Pacific, and they've been cooling off all the while. Like I said, as we've gone through spring and early summer here, you can see that sinking or the sinking on the graph, but really just kind of a cooling of those temperatures. I would expect, based on that trade wind surge there, that we can expect even rapid more entry into La Niña territory, which is down here at -0.5 degrees Celsius. So it doesn't take a huge shift in those ocean temperatures to get us down to a La Niña at this point. So perhaps by July, I would expect us to be in La Niña territory as we get near the end of summer. That would increase the chance, I would imagine, of staying with it through the next water year, which has all sorts of implications. If we look at the latest ECMWF forecast of that La Niña probability, see the temperature is expected to continue to cool down further as we go through August, September, and October. A lot of these members actually in something of maybe a weaker or moderate La Nina. Some of them staying closer to neutral. It's kind of surprised me. I thought the ECMWF would be a little bit more aggressive in this latest June update, just based on some other things that we've seen here in the forecast in terms of La Nina development. But nonetheless, I don't want to discount that the European model has been a little bit weaker in the La Nina development in the last kind of month or two from some of these forecasts. Maybe lessening the chance that we dive into a deeper or cooler La Nina, which you would imagine has maybe more textbook effects. We say something more neutral. Maybe the upcoming winter is less La Nina-like and more variable with less predictability. So this is something to keep an eye on going forward, at least right now, based on what we just looked at in those Haave-Mueller diagrams, based on the increased strengthening of the trade winds coming up, based on how warm the Atlantic is. If anything, to me, we're looking more La Nina by the day. It doesn't look to me like the weakest La Nina developing. But at times the ECMWF has had kind of an early clue on some of this, so I don't want to discount this either, that there is still this kind of story here that we could have a weaker La Nina as we go through the fall and then into parts of the winter here. Last thing I wanted to show you, this is that same NMME forecast model of a combination of another number of different seasonal model runs here. This is about as far as it goes out here, October, November, December. This is a very long range seasonal outlook here. I don't want to show anything too far out, but it actually looks pretty textbook La Nina, which makes sense. Some and a lot of these seasonal models predicting a La Nina development as we go through summer and then the next water year. So the early part of that water year, at least from this forecast here, looks pretty La Nina-y, and that you have more precipitation focused on the Pacific Northwest, parts of British Columbia, parts of the Willamette Valley, northern Idaho, northwest Montana, eastern Washington, some areas that could probably use some rainfall based on the deficits that we talked about. And then unfortunately further to the south, a drier start to the water year in California, parts of Arizona, Nevada, Utah, areas where we typically expect drought development in a La Nina year. So at least for now, the forecasts that have us developing a La Nina show a pretty La Nina-like precipitation pattern. Of course, that makes sense, but it is interesting to see the forecast to line up like that so clearly. We'll keep an eye on this. Like I said, there is this kind of chance that this La Nina isn't as potent as maybe it looks right now, at least as the European model is concerned. We'll have to keep an eye on this in the future to see if it's maybe more textbook like this. There are years when La Nina, can deliver rainfall to parts of California, the Sierra Nevadas, as well as Washington or as well as British Columbia. So each one is never the same, and we'll have to tackle it as we get to it. That's all I have for you all here on this Wednesday afternoon. Thank you for watching.